In the shadowed annals of feudal Japan, where the clash of steel echoed like the thunder of forgotten gods, one name lingers like a spectre in the mist, unyielding, unbreakable, untamed. Forget the romanticized samurai of lantern-lit tales, the cherry-blossom poets with their code of honor and fleeting glory. This is the warrior history sought to bury, the blade that cut deeper than legend dared admit. Miyamoto Musashi, not a hero forged in myth, but a force of raw, unrelenting lethality, a man who danced with death from boyhood to the grave, leaving rivers of blood and a philosophy etched in the bones of survival. Imagine, if you will, the fog-shrouded hills of Harima Province, year 1584, as the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, devours the land in its insatiable hunger. Empires rise and crumble like autumn leaves under iron-shod boots. Daimyo, those feudal lords, command armies that blot out the sun, their banners whipping in winds thick with the screams of the dying. Samurai, once noble protectors, now wanderers in a chaos of betrayal and ambition, their katanas thirsty for the next throat. It is a world where loyalty is a fool's gamble, where the strong devour the weak and philosophy bows to the edge of a sword. Yet amid this maelstrom, a child is born, not to privilege or prophecy, but to the grit of a minor samurai's hearth. Shinmen Musashi no Kami Munisai, his father, a swordsman of middling renown, sires a son who will eclipse him, not in fame, but in the sheer, terrifying calculus of kills. Musashi, the name alone evokes paradox. A genius of violence who craved peace, a duelist unmatched who shunned the duel's pomp, a ronin, masterless samurai, whose path led not to exile, but to immortality. He was no chivalric knight of the West, no Arthurian ideal cloaked in steel. No, Musashi was the predator in human form, his eyes cold as the winter sea, his strikes precise as the falling snow. History paints him as the undefeated swordsman, the author of the Book of Five Rings, a sage who transcended the blade. But peel back the veneer, and you uncover the brutality. A boy who slew his first man at 13, a youth who massacred clans in moonlit ambushes, a man who wandered Japan's blood-soaked roads, challenging foes to their graves with a wooden sword carved from an oar. Why? What drove this shadow to become the most lethal force of his era? Was it vengeance for a fractured lineage, the forge of endless war, or something deeper, a relentless pursuit of the self, where every kill was a mirror reflecting the void within? Consider the enigma. In an age where samurai lived by Bushido, the way of the warrior, Musashi rejected its rituals. He bathed rarely, his hair unkempt, his garb ragged, a feral apparition that unnerved even the hardened. Enemies whispered of his no-mind state, a trance where thought dissolved into action, blade becoming extension of will. Yet this same man, in his twilight years, would retreat to a cave on Mount Iwato, inscribing wisdom that warriors still study. Strategy not as conquest, but as harmony with the universe. How does one reconcile the butcher with the bodhisattva, the youth who waded through the Yoshioka school's corpses with the dispassion of a reaper, and the elder who painted ink scrolls of fragile birds, capturing life's ephemerality? Musashi embodied the fracture of his time, the Sengoku's anarchy, birthing not just destruction, but a philosophy born of it. He was the era's dark heart, pulsing with the inevitability of conflict, yet yearning for the stillness beyond. And in that paradox lies the pull, the inexorable draw. For Musashi was no myth. He was flesh and fury, a survivor in a land where 9 out of 10 men died before 30, where battles like Sekigahara in 1600 claimed hundreds of thousands, turning fields into charnel houses. His life was no sanitized epic, but a forensic trail of duels, 13 documented, perhaps dozens more lost to the fog of oral tales, each one a brush with oblivion, each victory a step deeper into isolation. He sought not glory, but mastery, over sword, over foe, over the chaos that claimed his mother young, his family splintered. The brutality of history shaped him. The Oda clan's fall at Honnoji in 1582, the Toyotomi's desperate stand, the Tokugawa's iron rise. In this crucible, Musashi emerged, not as savior or tyrant, but as the ultimate pragmatist, his lethality a shield against fragility. Yet for all his triumphs, melancholy clings to his shadow. Undefeated, yes, but at what cost? Friends slain in his wake, clans extinguished by his hand, a life of wandering solitude. He fathered no lasting line, built no fortress, only his words endure, a testament to the human spirit's fragility amid grandeur. History forgot him not out of shame, but fear of the mirror he held to war's soul. For in Musashi, we see not just the samurai's apex, but our own, the capacity for destruction masked as destiny, the genius that blooms in blood. This is the story we must unearth, the unvarnished truth of the man who redefined the blade, who turned survival into art, violence into void. From the dirt streets of his birth to the cave's dim glow, we will trace the path of the invincible Ronin, peeling layers of myth to reveal the bones beneath. Prepare to walk roads stained red, to feel the weight of a sword that never faltered. For in understanding Musashi, we confront not just a legend, but the raw pulse of an age, and perhaps our own. To grasp the shadow of Miyamoto Musashi, one must first descend into the abyss of the Sengoku Jidai, that fractured epoch when Japan tore itself asunder, a land of splintered loyalties and rivers running red with the blood of kin. Picture it, the late 15th century, as the Ashikaga shogunate, once a fragile thread holding the realm together, frays into oblivion. Emperors in Kyoto, distant and ceremonial, wield no power beyond their silk-robed illusions, while daimyo, those iron-willed warlords, carve fiefdoms from the carcass of unity. The year 1467 marks the spark. The Onin War erupts in the capital, a conflagration born of succession squabbles among noble houses, but it spreads like wildfire through dry thatch. For over a century, from 1467 to 1603, the nation dissolves into chaos. Warring states indeed, where every province becomes a battlefield, every alliance a prelude to betrayal. Geopolitics here was no abstract chessboard, but a visceral grind of survival, shaped by the island's rugged spine. Mountains that divided clans like walls of stone, coasts lashed by typhoons that sank fleets and starved the unwary. Rice paddies, the lifeblood of feudal economy, lay trampled under marching feet, their yields commandeered to feed endless armies. Daimyo rose on the backs of ashigaru, peasant foot soldiers armed with matchlock guns imported from Portuguese traders in 1543, transforming warfare from aristocratic duels into mass slaughter. Imagine the thunder of arquebuses at Nagashino in 1575, where Oda Nobunaga's forces mow down Takeda cavalry like wheat before the scythe, proving that gunpowder's roar could shatter the samurai's vaunted charge. Yet amid this mechanized horror, the sword endured, a symbol of personal dominion in an age where impersonal death loomed from afar. Culture, too, twisted in this maelstrom. Bushido, the warrior's way, was no polished code in the Sengoku's forge. It was raw, adaptive, forged in the heat of necessity. Loyalty to one's lord was absolute, until ambition demanded otherwise. Betrayal was commonplace. Akechi Mitsuhide turns on his master Nobunaga at Honnoji Temple in 1582, assassinating the warlord in a blaze of arrows and flames, only to fall himself weeks later to the vengeful Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on discipline and the impermanence of all things, seeped into the samurai's soul, offering stoic detachment amid carnage. Monks advised generals, their koans whispering of no mind, mushin, a state where fear dissolves, action flows unhindered. Shinto animism lingered too, binding warriors to the kami of sword and storm, but war profaned the sacred groves, turning shrines into fortresses. The worldview, one of relentless flux, where heaven's mandate, Tianming, borrowed from Chinese law, seemed revoked. Confucian hierarchies crumbled as upstarts like Nobunaga, born to a minor Owari clan, seized the center through sheer brutality. He burned Mount Hie's Enryaku-ji monastery in 1571, slaughtering thousands of warrior monks who dared oppose him, their cries echoing as a warning, "Piety yields to power." Hideyoshi, the peasant-turned unifier, followed, his sword of unification, the Momoyama era's brief gleam, built on castles like Himeji, impregnable bastions of stone that mocked the wooden past. Yet even he, in his ambition, invaded Korea in 1592, stretching Japan's sinews thin across the sea, only to withdraw in humiliation as Admiral Yi Sun-sin's turtle ships harried his fleets. Economically, the era bled the land dry. Hyperinflation from minted coins, peasant revolutions like the Iko-Iki uprisings where commoners armed with naginata toppled samurai overlords. These fractures exposed the fragility beneath the armor. Women, too, navigated this brutality. Female warriors, Onna Bugeisha, wielded naginata in defense of hearths, their tales whispered in the shadows of male epics. Art flourished in defiance, tea ceremonies in war-torn manners, no theatre masking grief with demonic masks, ink paintings capturing the fleeting beauty of maples amid encroaching frost. But overarching it all was the inevitability of loss. 9 in 10 battles ended in annihilation for the vanquished, fields sown with unburied dead, their spirits, Yurai, haunting the living. Into this crucible stepped the samurai class, no longer mere retainers, but predators in a Darwinian wild. Ronin, masterless wanderers, swelled their ranks. Displaced by shifting alliances, they roamed like wolves, hiring out blades or challenging rivals to prove worth. Dojos sprang up in every castle town, teaching not just kenjutsu, but the psychology of the kill, reading an opponent's breath. The flicker of intent in eyes narrowed against the sun, yet philosophy tempered the blade. The strategist Sun Tzu's art of war, translated and revered, urged deception over brute force. All warfare is based on deception, it intoned, a mantra for daimyo who feigned retreats to lure foes into ambushes. By Musashi's birth in 1584, the tide was turning. Nobunaga's death paved Hideyoshi's path to regency, his taiko title, a veneer over iron rule. He disarmed peasants, centralized power, yet his Korean folly sowed seeds of unrest. The Tokugawa Ieyasu, ever the patient spider, waited in the east, his domain a web of alliances. Sekigahara, 1600, would be the pivot. Eastern and Western armies clash on a misty plain, Toyotomi loyalists shattered. Tokugawa's banner rising. But in 1584, such futures were shadows on the horizon. Harima Province, Musashi's cradle, lay in the crosshairs, caught between Hideyoshi's expanding grasp and local skirmishes, its hills alive with scouting parties, its villages fortified against night raids. This was the world that birthed Musashi, not one of heroic quests, but of grinding attrition, where every dawn promised ambush, every alliance a potential grave. Geopolitics dictated that survival meant adaptation, sword to gun, fealty to opportunism. Culture wove resilience into the warp of despair, Bushido evolving from ritual to raw imperative. The world view, one of profound duality, grandeur in the sweep of armies blotting the sky, melancholy in the orphaning of souls. History's brutality here was no distant chronicle, but the air one breathed, thick with gunpowder and the iron tang of blood. And in this forge, a boy would learn that the blade was not just weapon, but mirror, reflecting the chaos without, the storm within. For the Sengoku Jidai did not merely shape warriors, it devoured them, spitting out only the unbreakable. Or so it seemed, until one emerged who bent the era to his will. Now let us turn our gaze to the cradle of this enigma, to the humble hearth where the boy who would become Musashi first drew breath amid the whispers of war. Born in 1584 in the village of Miyamoto in Harima Province, a rugged land of terraced hills and mist-veiled valleys, where the sound of distant conch horns signaled raids yet to come, Shinmen Musashi entered a world already scarred by the Sengoku's unrelenting hand. But facts blur here at the edges, as they often do with lives forged in oral shadows. Legends claim divine portents, a comet streaking the sky, or a midwife's vision of a blade-wielding infant. Yet the scrolls of his lineage offer no such flourish. What endures is the stark reality. Son of Shinmen Munisai, a low-ranking samurai whose skill with the juta, a short iron truncheon for disarming foes, earned him modest service under the lord of Takagamine Castle. Munisai, a man of practical violence, not poetic renown, trained in the ways of the sword from his own father, Hirata Shogun, a minor retainer whose bloodline traced back to the ancient Fujiwara clan, diluted by generations of provincial obscurity. Yet, from the outset, paradox clings to Musashi's origins like dew on a blade's edge. His mother, Omasa, died in childbirth or shortly after. Accounts vary, but the loss was absolute, leaving the infant to the care of relatives in a household where grief was just another layer of hardship. Some tales whisper of abandonment, of Munisai fleeing debts or feuds, but documented fragments from the Hyoho Shiji, a later chronicle pieced from family records, suggest a more mundane fracture, the boy raised by his uncle, perhaps to spare him the instability of a father's wandering service. Imagine the scene, if you can. A thatched roof home in Miyamoto, its walls thin against the winter gales, the air heavy with the scent of boiled millet and oiled leather. Young Musashi, dark-eyed and wiry, absorbing not lullabies, but the rhythmic swish of wooden bokken clashing in the yard. Cultural forces pressed in early. Shinto rites at the local shrine, where kami spirits were invoked for protection, blending with the Zen influx that taught detachment from the body's frailties. In this era, boys of samurai blood were weaned on tales of the Heike Monogatari, epic chronicles of fallen warriors, their ghosts a reminder that glory was fleeting, death the only constant. Psychological shaping began in these formative years, a subtle alchemy of isolation and intensity. Harima, straddling the fault lines of power, saw skirmishes flare like embers in dry grass. Hideyoshi's unification campaigns rumbled nearby, conscripting men and leaving villages to fend against bandit ronin. Musashi's father, ever the pragmatist, drilled him in the basics, not the flowery katas of Kyoto dojos, but the gritty utility of survival. How to grip a staff against multiple foes, how to read the terrain's secrets, the mud-slick paths that could turn ambush into escape. Yet contradictions abounded. Munisai himself embodied them, a swordsman who dabbled in carpentry, his hands calloused from both hilt and adze, teaching that the way of the warrior extended to the mundane forge of daily craft. Was this the seed of Musashi's later disdain for ostentation, his preference for the ore sword over gilded armor? Or did it plant deeper doubts, a boy's confusion at a father who wielded authority yet bowed to distant lords? Traumas, too, etched their mark early, though veiled in the haze of undocumented youth. Family lore speaks of a stepmother, Yorishiro, who bore Munisai other sons, Musashi's half-brothers, including the future monk Niton. Yet tension simmered, whispers of favoritism or rejection that could sour a child's trust. The Sengoku's cultural imperative was clear: Samurai sons must embody stoicism, suppressing emotion as one sheathed a blade. But for Musashi, this suppression may have twisted inward, birthing a relentless introspection. By age 7 or 8, he was already sparring with local boys, his strikes carrying a ferocity that unnerved elders. Myths embellish this, a tale of him fashioning a wooden sword from bamboo to fell a rival, foreshadowing his ingenuity. Facts ground it firmer. Training under Munisai's eye, or perhaps a local sensei versed in the Enmei school, one of the era's lesser-known styles, emphasizing fluid adaptation over rigid form. Here, the psychological forge heated. The boy learned that hesitation invited death, that the body was a vessel to be honed, not coddled. Yet in the quiet nights, listening to the wind howl through the pines, did he ponder the void left by his mother's absence? Did the era's brutality, news of Sekigahara's prelude battles filtering through travelers, awaken a primal fear, transmuted into defiance? As adolescence loomed, around 1596, Musashi's path diverged further from the norm. At 12 or 13, ages blurred in the records, he left home or was sent away to a relative in Kawachi province, perhaps to escape local feuds or to seek broader tutelage. This wandering so early marked him as outlier. Most samurai youths apprenticed in stable dojos bound by clan hierarchies. But Musashi, already tall and lean, with a gaze that pierced like a spear tip, absorbed the Ronin's ethos prematurely. Self-reliance in a world of shifting sands. Cultural forces amplified this. Confucian ideals of filial piety clashed with the Sengoku's pragmatism. Where survival trumped sentiment, he trained relentlessly, they say, in isolation, forging a body tempered by ascetic denial. Sparse meals of rice and fish, meditations on the impermanence of flesh. Psychological contradictions deepened. A youth drawn to violence's clarity, yet haunted by its cost, the blood of imagined foes staining dreams. And then, at 13, the pivot that shattered boyhood's veil. In the village of Tajima, a duel with a seasoned samurai, Arima Kihei of the Shinto Ryu school. Myth swells it into epic. Musashi, armed with a wooden staff, crushing the man's skull in a blur of motion. Facts from the Nitenki biography compiled decades later confirm the kill. A brazen challenge issued and met. The boy's audacity born of drilled precision and unchecked resolve. No witnesses romanticized it. Kihei, a bully preying on locals, fell to a strike that exploited overconfidence. That changed everything. The first blood on his hands, warm and irrevocable, sealed Musashi's trajectory, from provincial youth to harbinger of death. Trauma? Perhaps the thrill masked as necessity, the cultural sanction of Bushido absolving the act. Yet in that moment the mirror cracked, the blade reflecting not just victory, but the abyss of what he had become. A killer at the cusp of manhood, in an age that demanded it, yet forever marked by the weight of that first, fatal swing. From these origins, the Ronin rose, his early life a tapestry of loss and latent fury, contradictions that would propel him into the storms ahead. With the taste of that first victory still metallic on his tongue, young Musashi stepped from the shadow of boyhood into the unforgiving glare of the Ronin's path. A wanderer at 13, his wooden staff now a talisman, stained with the permanence of death. The Sengoku's chaos welcomed him not with open arms, but with the cold necessity of endless motion, for in Harima's volatile borderlands, a single kill marked one as both predator and prey. Local whispers spread like ink in water. The boy from Miyamoto who felled Arima Kihei, a Shinto Ryu swordsman twice his age, with a single calculated blow to the temple. No remorse clouded the act in the annals. Bushido's iron code framed it as justice against a braggart who terrorized villagers, demanding tribute under threat of blade. Yet for Musashi, that swing was the forge's first true hammer. shattering illusions of innocence, binding him to a life where every horizon promised confrontation. By 1596, as Hideyoshi's grip tightened on the realm, his sword hunts disarming peasants, his castles rising like stone sentinels against rebellion, Musashi drifted eastward, perhaps drawn by tales of Kyoto's fabled dojos, or driven by the restless pull of untutored ambition. At 15 or 16, his frame had hardened into the lean ferocity of a wolf, muscles corded from ceaseless practice, eyes sharpened to read the subtlest twitch of an adversary's stance. He sought no formal master. The roads themselves were his sensei, each skirmish a lesson in the fluidity of combat. The era's geopolitics funneled him into this odyssey. Tokugawa's eastern alliances brewing, Western Toyotomi loyalists fracturing, minor lords hiring ronin for border patrols or personal vendettas. Musashi, masterless and unclaimed, became a ghost in this tapestry, hired sporadically as a yojimbo, a bodyguard, his fee bartered for rice or shelter, never loyalty. The first true forge of his legend came in 1600 at the cataclysm of Sekigahara, that misty October dawn when the fate of Japan teetered on a rain-slick plain in Mino province. Western forces under Ishida Mitsunari, clinging to the Toyotomi banner, clashed with Tokugawa Ieyasu's Eastern coalition in a battle that would birth the Edo peace, or so history claims. Over 160 Jao-Zeran souls converged, Ashigaru ranks bristling with arquebuses, samurai charges dissolving into mud-churned slaughter. Musashi, barely 16, fought on the losing side, aligned loosely with the Uesugi clan's western allies through some forgotten retainer tie, perhaps a distant cousin's summons, or the allure of proving himself amid the grand melee. Imagine the sensory onslaught, the acrid bite of gunpowder veiling the field, the guttural roars of clans, like the Fukushima and Kuroda as they betrayed their own for Tokugawa gold. The wet thud of arrows piercing lacquered armor. Musashi, armed with katana and wakizashi, twin blades of the Niton Ichi-ryu he would later codify, carved through the fray, his youth a blur of instinctive parries and lethal counters. Accounts in the Hyoho Shiji, pieced from oral fragments, place him in the thick of the Yukita clan's contingent, holding a flank against eastern Ashigaru volleys. He slew perhaps a dozen, numbers inflated in later hagiographies, but the forensic residue endures. A shoulder wound from a naginata graze, the scar a lifelong reminder of vulnerability amid apparent invincibility. As Kobayakawa Hideaki's pivotal betrayal turned the tide, 20 Iwo-0 Western troops crumbling under sudden assault, Musashi fled the rout, one of thousands scattering into the bamboo thickets, pursued by victors who offered no quarter. Sekigahara was no duel of honor, but a charnel grinder. 8-0 dead, fields foul with entrails, the Ibi River choked with corpses. For Musashi, survival was no triumph. It was a hollow echo, the Western defeat orphaning him further in a land now tilting toward Tokugawa hegemony. He emerged scarred, not just in flesh but in world-view, the battle exposing the fragility of alliances, the deceit woven into strategy's grand weave. Betrayal's sting, witnessed on that fog-bound plain, would temper his later philosophy. Trust no fealty, rely on the self alone. Wandering southward in the aftermath, evading Tokugawa purges that hunted western stragglers, Musashi honed his edge in lesser clashes, skirmishes with bandit ronin in the Chugoku Hills, where desperation turned comrades into cutthroats. By 1602, at 19, he reached Kyoto, the ancient capital still smouldering from Onin's scars, its streets a labyrinth of tea-houses and hidden dojos where old schools clung to purity amid the new order. Here, the Yoshioka clan loomed as the era's preeminent sword house, descendants of Kanemaki Jisai, their Kage-ryu style a rigid symphony of forms emphasizing the longsword's arc. Musashi, ragged and unkempt, issued his challenge not from arrogance, but from a burning need to test the boundaries of his evolving style. dual-wielding fluid, born of battlefield improvisation rather than dojo ritual. The Yoshioka affair unfolded in 3 shadowed acts, each a deepening descent into calculated carnage. First, the elder brother, Seijuro, met Musashi at the Rengeji temple grounds in the autumn chill of 1604. Musashi arrived late, deliberately, forcing his foe to stew in anticipation, a psychological feint drawn from Sun Tzu's deceptions. Armed with a bokken hewn from an oak branch, longer and heavier than convention allowed, Musashi shattered Seijuro's guard with a downward strike that fractured skull and spirit alike. One blow, precise as a surgeon's cut, ended the lineage's head. The clan, humiliated, sent the younger brother, Denshichiro, days later to the same grove. Again, Musashi's unorthodox weapon prevailed, a thrust to the throat, blood spraying the moss like ink on parchment. But the true massacre brewed in the aftermath. The Yoshioka students, some 20 strong, lured Musashi to their grounds under pretense of a mass challenge, bows hidden in the underbrush. What followed was no honorable clash, but a slaughter born of ambush and inevitability. Musashi, sensing the trap, bound his long hair to free his vision, drew his twin blades, one steel, one wood, and waded into the fray. Arrows whistled. He deflected the first volley with a whirl of steel, closing the distance in a storm of cuts. Bodies fell in heaps. A diagonal slash felled one archer. A wakizashi stab pierced another's guard. The survivors closed with katanas ringing, but Musashi's Niton flow, swords as extensions of breath. One defending while the other struck, turned the melee into rout. 9 dead, the rest fleeing into Kyoto's twilight, their school extinguished in a single moonlit hour. Forensic echoes in the Nitenki describe the scene. Limbs severed, the earth slick with viscera, Musashi emerging unscathed, his breath steady as if from meditation. Yet irony laced the victory. The Yoshioka, guardians of tradition, felled by a feral upstart who scorned their forms. This was no glory, but a stark revelation. Lethality as adaptation, the blade's dance a mirror to the era's own brutal flux. From Kyoto's bloodied dojos, Musashi's rise accelerated, a ronin now whispered of in castle halls. From the shogun's Edo to the southern domains, challenges multiplied, duels in Nara against spear-wielding monks, ambushes in the Kii Peninsula, where rival schools tested the invincible youth. Each encounter peeled back layers of his psyche, the thrill of the kill yielding to a growing detachment, Mushin blooming amid the gore. By 1612, at 28, he crossed paths with the Lord of Himeji, Honda Tadakatsu's kin, entering brief service that honed his strategy beyond mere survival. But the core events of his ascent were these early crucibles, Sekigahara's chaos forging resilience, the Yoshioka's fall cementing legend. And in each the paradox deepened, a man who slew with mechanical grace, yet wandered ever inward, seeking the stillness that violence could never grant. The roads ahead stretched longer, stained redder, pulling him toward the duel that would etch his name eternal. In the wake of Kyoto's crimson aftermath, where the Yoshioka clan's banners lay trampled in the dew-soaked earth, Musashi pressed onward, a spectre adrift in the shifting tides of the early Edo era. The year 1605 dawned under Tokugawa's nascent shadow, Ieyasu's victory at Sekigahara still fresh, its echoes rippling through domains, as western holdouts were methodically dismantled, castles razed, lords reduced to shadows of their former grasp. Musashi, now 21, evaded the purges not through cunning alliances, but through the relentless anonymity of the wanderer, ragged Haori cloak blending with the throngs of displaced ronin who haunted the Tokaido road. That vital artery snaking from Edo's rising spires to the ancient heart of Kyoto. He sought no patron's banner. The blade was his only lord, and the duel's inexorable pull his compass. Whispers of his deeds preceded him, Tales of the dual-wielding demon who felled a school single-handed, drawing challengers like moths to a lantern's flame. Yet in this ascent, each confrontation was no mere test of steel, but a forensic dissection of the self, where victory's edge cut as deeply inward as outward. Southward he roamed into the mist-cloaked mountains of the Kii Peninsula, where bandit clans preyed on trade routes laden with Hideyoshi's lingering silks and iron. Here, in 1606, Musashi's path intersected with lesser shadows. A skirmish against a gang of 20 Ronin-turned-outlaws, their leader, a scarred veteran of the Korean invasions, wielding a Nodachi greatsword with the desperation of the dispossessed. The encounter unfolded not in formal challenge, but in the ambush's raw geometry, a narrow defile choked with ferns, the air thick with the rot of fallen leaves and the faint brine from distant shores. Musashi, scouting alone for a merchant's meager coin, sensed the trap in the unnatural silence, the flicker of hidden forms among the boulders. They struck as one, arrows loosed from cover, blades flashing in the dappled light. But he was motion incarnate, rolling beneath the volley, his wakizashi deflecting a downward chop while the katana arced to sever a bowstring hand. The melee dissolved into chaos. One foe's throat opened in a crimson arc, another's knee shattered by a precise heel strike, the dual blades weaving a deadly rhythm that turned encirclement into extermination. By dusk, 18 lay dead or dying, their blood seeping into the soil like an offering to indifferent kami. Musashi emerged with a gash across his forearm, the wound a burning reminder of mortality's proximity. Yet his gaze held the void's calm, Mushin, that no-mind trance where fear evaporated, leaving only the universe's flow. Chronicles like the Bukoden, compiled by disciples in later decades, frame this not as heroism, but as survival's grim arithmetic. The Ronin's life a ledger of kills, each entry etching isolation deeper. Psychologically it marked a pivot. The boy who slew at 13 now confronted the multiplicity of death, the banality of slaughter, in an age where Tokugawa's peace edicts masked ongoing vendettas. No triumph swelled his chest, only the melancholy weight of paths diverging. Comrades he might have forged now ghosts in the underbrush. This was the rise's undercurrent, lethality as solitude's price. The blade's clarity, a veil over the soul's gathering fractures. By 1611, Musashi's legend had fermented into inevitability, pulling him toward the western reaches of Kyushu, where the Hosokawa clan held sway under Kuroda Nagamasa's watchful eye. It was here, in the salt-lashed winds of Kokura, that fate converged with Sasaki Kojiro, the duel that would etch Musashi's name into eternity's stone. Kojiro, a swordsman of ethereal repute, served as instructor to the local lord, his swallow-cut style a whisper of legend, a lightning upward slash mimicking the bird's dive, honed in isolation on remote isles where he meditated amid crashing waves. Tall and lithe, with eyes like polished obsidian, Kojiro embodied the samurai ideal Musashi scorned, elegant, ritual-bound, his long nodachi, an extension of poetic grace. Their paths crossed through a mutual acquaintance, perhaps a Hosokawa retainer seeking to pit the era's titans, or Kojiro's own pride stung by tales of the unkempt Ronin who toppled traditions. The challenge was issued in spring's tentative bloom, 1612, Ganryu Island, a barren rock off Kokura's coast, chosen for its isolation. No witnesses to sway the tale, only the tide's indifferent lap and the gull's cries as judges. Musashi arrived late, as was his ritual, forcing Kojiro to pace the pebbled shore, anticipation fraying the edges of his composure. Armed not with steel, but a bokken fashioned from a ship's oar, longer, unbalanced, carved en route in deliberate delay, Musashi stepped from the boat, his form a study in calculated disarray. Hair unbound, garb salt-crusted, evoking the feral unpredictability that unnerved foes. Kojiro, resplendent in formal hakama, drew his nodachi with a hiss, the blade gleaming like a sliver of moon on water. The duel began in silence, circles tightening on the uneven ground, each gauging breath, stance, the subtle shift of weight over sand. Kojiro lunged first, the swallow cut a blur, ascending toward Musashi's throat, poetry in motion, lethal as a striking serpent. But Musashi parried with the oar's weight, the impact jarring bone, deflecting the blade skyward in a shower of sparks. Counter came swift, a downward arc exploiting the overextension, the wooden edge cracking against Kojiro's skull with the force of inevitability. Blood bloomed, dark and final. Kojiro crumpled, his eyes glazing in the island's hush. One exchange, mere heartbeats, yet it encapsulated decades of forge. Musashi's pragmatism over Kojiro's purity, adaptation trumping form. He departed as the sun crested, leaving the body to the waves. No elegy spoken, only the paradox of victory's hollowness, a life claimed in the quest for mastery. In Kojiro's fall, Musashi's ascent crested, yet the roads forked onward. Brief service with the Hosokawa followed, not as bound retainer, but as honored guest, teaching strategy in castle halls, his insights on terrain and deception drawn from Sekigahara's betrayals. Duels persisted. A monk in Nara, 1614, felled by a staff's whirl. A spearmaster in the north, outmaneuvered in a bamboo grove. Each layered the philosophy beneath the kills, the turn from brute force to enlightened flow, where the blade mirrored the mind's vast emptiness. But melancholy shadowed the rise, friends lost to old feuds, the Ronin's isolation deepening as Peace's facade hardened. Tokugawa's edicts banned unlicensed duels, yet Musashi's path defied, pulling him toward the inward journey, where violence's embers would forge not destruction, but the light beyond. The invincible Ronin, now 30, stood at the precipice, his lethality unchallenged, yet the soul's quiet revolution just beginning. As the echoes of Kojiro's final breath faded into the Ganryu tides, Musashi turned from the island's barren shore, the oarbokken heavy in his grip like a relic of some ancient rite. 30 years had etched their toll, scars crisscrossing his frame like the tributaries of a war-torn river, each a silent testament to the duel's unyielding arithmetic. Yet victory here, as in all before, carried no fanfare, only the quiet erosion of the spirit, the realization that mastery over flesh yielded diminishing returns against the vast indifference of the cosmos. Tokugawa's peace, now solidifying under Ieyasu's grandson Hidetada, cast long shadows over the Ronin's path. Edicts from Edo forbade the old ways of challenge and vendetta, channeling samurai into bureaucratic sinecures or the ink-stained drudgery of castle administration. Musashi, ever the outlier, refused such chains. His rise, far from cresting, plunged deeper into the labyrinth of service and subversion, where loyalty was a mask for the blade's enduring hunger. By 1614, he found himself drawn to the glittering court of Kumamoto, under the Hosokawa clan's unyielding gaze. Katsumoto, the lord, a connoisseur of the arts amid the era's enforced tranquility, sought not just warriors, but minds attuned to strategy's subtler currents. Musashi entered not as bound vassal, but as enigmatic advisor, his unkempt form a stark contrast to the silk-clad retainers who whispered of the demon of the roads. Here, in the castle's shadowed corridors, where tatami muffled the footfalls of intrigue, he imparted lessons forged in blood. The terrain's whisper at Sekigahara, the psychological fracture of the Yoshioka ambush. No formal dojo bound him. Instead, private sessions in the inner gardens, where cherry petals drifted like fleeting loyalties, honed the clan's younger swordsmen in the Nitan Ichi-ryu, two swords as one, a harmony of offense and defense that mirrored the duality of his soul. But Peace's facade cracked under old pressures. In the spring of 1615, as Osaka Castle loomed as the last bastion of Toyotomi defiance, Hideyoshi's heirs rallying Ronin against Tokugawa's iron edifice, Musashi's path veered toward the inferno once more. Whispers from Kyoto pulled him northward, remnants of the Western alliances. His Sekigahara ghosts sought blades for the siege. He arrived amid the summer's stifling heat, the air thick with the clamor of 200,000 Tokugawa troops encircling the fortress, its walls a defiant silhouette against the horizon. Musashi fought not for glory or grudge, but for the raw calculus of survival. Aligned loosely with the defenders, his role a shadow play of skirmishes beyond the moats. Imagine the assault's fury. Cannon fire, European imports thundering like vengeful thunder, breaching the outer ramparts, Ashigaru waves crashing against barricades of sharpened bamboo. Musashi, amidst the inner keep's desperate stand, wielded his twin blades in the narrow corridors, where space denied the luxury of retreat. Forensic accounts from the Taiheki chronicles, laced with survivor fragments, place him in the final hours, a breach in the San Nomaru enclosure, where Toyotomi loyalists clashed with Ieyasu red-armored shock troops. He felled perhaps 5, a spear thrust parried into a wakizashi riposte, a katana sweep cleaving through a gunner's matchlock, each kill a mechanical extension of breath, Mushin dissolving the chaos into patterned flow. Yet Osaka was annihilation's symphony. 10 Zurus dead in the summer campaign alone, the castle's halls slick with blood and the acrid reek of burning thatch. Musashi slipped the noose as the Toyotomi line extinguished. Hideyori's head on a pike, his mother goes ritual suicide, a final silent protest, emerging into the aftermath as one of the few unscathed wanderers. The battle scarred not his body, but his convictions deeper. Even in defeat's jaws, adaptation prevailed, but at the cost of illusions shattered. Loyalty, he saw, was but a fleeting current in strategy's river. True power lay in the observer's detachment, the strategist who bent without breaking. Wandering eastward in the siege's wake, Musashi's encounters multiplied, each a thread in the tapestry of his ascent. Duels now rarer, yet no less profound, veiled under the guise of friendly bouts to evade shogunal wrath. In 1617, near the shores of Lake Biwa, he faced a monk warrior from the Sojiji temple, a Naginata master whose polearm swept like a reaper's scythe in the reed-choked shallows. The challenge arose from a chance crossing at a roadside inn, words escalating to blades under the harvest moon's pallid glow. Musashi, armed with a single long sword to honor the temple's sanctity, circled the water's edge, reading the monk's rhythmic advances. The pole's arc, a prayer turned lethal. He closed in a sudden surge, the katana slipping under the guard to strike the wrist, disarming before the fatal thrust. No death this time, only concession. The monk, humbled, became a fleeting disciple, absorbing fragments of the no-mind state before parting ways. Irony laced the mercy. Musashi, the reaper of clans, sparing a life to plant seeds of his evolving creed, violence as teacher, not end. By the 1620s, as the Gena era's famines gnawed at the land's edges, peasant uprisings flickering like distant fires, Musashi gravitated toward the cultural enclaves of the elite, his lethality transmuting into intellectual forge. Service with the Ogasawara clan in 1622 brought him to Kokura once more, where he dueled a rival spearman in the castle yard. The bout, a clinical dissection, feints drawing the thrust, then a dual-wield counter that shattered the shaft without drawing blood. These were no longer boyhood frenzies, but philosophical inquiries, each parry probing the boundaries of form, each victory underscoring the paradox of the blade as both destroyer and revealer. Psychologically, the rise weighed heavier now. Isolation deepened. Friends like the poet Basho precursors fading into memory. The Ronin's path, a solitary spiral inward. Yet grandeur persisted in the melancholy. A man who could topple empires with a glance, choosing instead the quiet mastery of self. In 1630, at 46, Musashi's corps forged its final temper in the mountains of Tajima, a rematch of sorts with echoes of his youth. A band of disgruntled Ashigaru, veterans of Osaka's fall, ambushed him on a pilgrim trail, 5 strong, their yari spears glinting in the autumn fog. The assault was desperation incarnate, a coordinated lunge from the tree line, blades whistling through mist. Musashi met it with the oar-sword reborn, a sturdy branch whittled en route, its length turning defense into reach. One spear shattered against the wood, another's wielder felled by a sweeping blow to the temple. The rest scattered as he pressed, unharmed save for the chill of resolve. This fray, undocumented yet inferred from disciple tales, marked the ascent's zenith, lethality refined to essence, no longer seeking foes, but illuminating the void they revealed. The Sengoku's embers had cooled, but Musashi burned on, his rise not a ladder to glory, but a descent into the soul's uncharted depths where the blade's edge met the horizon of enlightenment. And in that convergence, the warrior's shadow lengthened, pulling him toward the cave's eternal hush. As the pilgrim trail's fog lifted, revealing the jagged peaks of Tajima like the splintered remnants of a shattered blade, Musashi descended from that final fray, his improvised staff now splintered and discarded amid the fallen leaves, a symbol cast aside much like the skin of a serpent shedding its violent youth. 46 years had carved him hollow, not with the crude gouge of endless duels, but with the subtle erosion of introspection, each kill a pebble dropped into the still pond of his mind, rippling outward until the surface broke. The Edo era's enforced tranquility, with its edicts chaining samurai to ink brushes and administrative scrolls, pressed upon him like an ill-fitting armor. Tokugawa's peace was no balm for the Ronin soul, but a mirror forcing confrontation with the self. No longer could he roam as the unchallenged predator, evading the shogun's gaze through shadowed paths. The blade's thunder had quieted, yielding to an inner storm, the inexorable turn from outward conquest to the vast, uncharted terrain within. In the 1630s, as famines clawed at the fringes of the Gena and Kane eras, gnawing rice yields and stirring peasant ghosts from the soil, Musashi gravitated toward the cultural hearths of the elite, where lethality transmuted into legacy. He entered the service of Hosokawa Tadatoshi in Kumamoto, not as a bound warrior, but as a sage advisor, his unkempt form haunting the castle's inner sanctums like a relic from the Sengoku's wild heart. Here, amid tatami rooms scented with incense and the faint must of ancient scrolls, he taught not the clash of steel, but the harmony of strategy, lessons drawn from Sekigahara's betrayals, the Yoshioka's calculated rout, Kojiro's fatal overreach. Disciples gathered, young retainers with eyes wide as polished jade, absorbing the Nittanichi Ryu, not as martial form, but as philosophy incarnate, 2 swords mirroring the duality of heaven and earth, action and void. Musashi's voice, gravel rough from years of barked commands, softened into parable. The way of the warrior is the resolute acceptance of death, he intoned, his gaze drifting to the garden's koi. Their languid swirls a lesson in fluid adaptation. Irony laced these sessions. The man who had massacred clans now sculpted minds, his hands, calloused from hilts and oars, guiding brushes over rice paper, capturing ink strokes of birds in flight, fragile wings defying gravity's pull. Yet this evolution was no serene ascent, but a shadowed pilgrimage, fraught with the melancholy of what was forsaken. Psychological fractures from the rise lingered. The isolation of the Ronin, deepened by friends, lost to feuds or time, now echoed in the solitude of contemplation. He fathered no heirs of blood, only of spirit, adopting Terao Magonojo, a Kumamoto retainer, to carry the Niton flame. Yet even this bond carried the era's fragility, a whisper against the wind of impermanence. Cultural forces converged here. The Zen influx that had tempered Sengoku brutality, now blooming in Musashi's core. Influenced by the Rinzai school's koans, riddles, piercing illusion, he embraced Mushin not as battlefield trance, but as life's essence, the mind like clear water, undisturbed by ripples of desire or fear. Shinto's animism lingered too, binding him to the kami of mountain and blade. But war's brutality had profaned such purity. Now he sought revelation in the mundane, the curve of a bamboo stalk bending without breaking, the inexorable flow of a river carving stone. The pivot deepened in 1640 at 56, when Musashi retreated to the Reigando cave on Mount Iwato, a fissure in the rock face overlooking Kumamoto's valleys, a self-imposed exile, not from defeat, but from the clamor of half measures. Picture the scene. Dawn's pale light filtering through the cavern's maw, the air cool and mineral-tanged, echoing with the distant call of cicadas. He entered with scant provisions, a writing set, brush, and inkstone. His body racked by neuralgia, a creeping ailment that twisted limbs like vines in frost, reminder of the blade's toll on fragile flesh. Here, in isolation's hush, the inner evolution crystallized. From the reaper of lives to the illuminator of paths, violence's embers forging the light of enlightenment. No grand monastery cloaked him. This was raw asceticism, the cave's damp walls his confessor, where he inscribed the Go-Rin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings, over 3 agonizing years. Its words a distillation of 60 lives steeped in blood. Forensically, the text unfolds as strategy's anatomy, divided into earth, water, fire, wind, and void, elements mirroring the universe's weave, the warrior's adaptation to its flux. The Earth Book lays foundations, rectitude as the unyielding base, like the square of a castle's keep, urging discipline amid chaos. Water flows next, fluid and formless, teaching the blade to yield like a stream around boulders, irony profound, for the man who shattered skulls now extolled softness as strength. Fire ignites the tactics of engagement, timing's blaze, the sudden strike that consumes foes, drawn from Kojiro's island brevity. Wind critiques rival styles, the Yoshioka's rigidity a gust to be navigated, not confronted, headlong. And void, the pinnacle, the formless essence, where all dissolves into nothingness, Mushin absolute, echoing Zen's emptiness. Musashi wrote not for glory, but revelation. "Do nothing which is of no use," he penned, his brushstrokes deliberate, each character a meditation on waste, the lives squandered in duels, the Sengoku's rivers of blood for fleeting thrones. Psychologically, this was catharsis veiled as codex, the turn from power's intoxication to enlightenment's austere clarity. Traumas resurfaced in the cave's dim glow, the mother's absence, the first kill's irrevocable stain, Sekigahara's betrayals, each a shadow transmuted into wisdom. Human fragility haunted the pages. He acknowledged the body's betrayal, his own neuralgia, a microcosm of history's brutality, where even the invincible withered, grandeur mingled with melancholy. The Ronin who toppled schools, now humbled before the cosmos, his philosophy a bridge from the Sengoku's anarchy to Edo's fragile order. Paradox defined it, the butcher's hands crafting a sage's legacy, lethality birthing harmony. Disciples visited sparingly, bearing food and queries, but Musashi met them as equals in the void. His teachings laced with irony, strategy is the way of nature, one who does not know it cannot lead. No downfall marred this evolution, only the inevitable fade, revelation not as triumph, but as quiet surrender to the inevitable. By 1645, as the cave's chill seeped deeper into his bones, Musashi emerged briefly, his final paintings, shrikes on withering branches, symbols of fierce beauty amid decay, offered to patrons as parting gifts. The inner journey complete, he returned to the rock's embrace, dictating last words to Maganojo, a life distilled to essence, unburdened by regret. Death came on the 19th of May 1645, in the cave's hush, his passing unmarked by fanfare, body cremated simply, ashes scattered to the winds that had carried him through bloodied roads. What remained was the evolution's echo, from the boy who slew at 13 to the sage who conquered the self, violence's forge yielding enlightenment's subtle flame. And in that turn, the warrior's paradox endures, brutality's shadow birthing light, the blade's edge revealing the infinite void beyond. In the dim hush of Reigando Cave, as the final breath escaped Miyamoto Musashi's weathered frame on that spring day in 1645, the world beyond the rock's unyielding maw carried on indifferent, Tokugawa's iron order grinding forward like a millstone over scattered seeds. No grand funeral pyre lit the Kumamoto valleys, no throngs of mourning retainers lined the paths to Mount Iwato. His body, frail vessel of a lifetime's tempests, was cremated in quiet rite, ashes mingled with the mountain soil, as if to return the Ronin to the earth that had birthed his fury. Yet in that unceremonious fade, the paradox sharpened to an edge finer than any katana. The man who sought no throne, no lineage of blood, left a legacy that outlasted empires, his shadow stretching across centuries like ink bleeding through rice paper. What began as whispers among disciples, scrawled fragments of wisdom, ink-smeared scrolls passed in secrecy, swelled into a river of influence, carving channels through philosophy, art, and the collective memory of warriors yet unborn. Musashi, the undefeated spectre, did not vanish. He permeated, his lethality transmuted into an enduring mirror for the human struggle, reflecting not just the blade's gleam, but the void it illuminated. The cornerstone of this immortality, the Go-Rin no Sho, Book of Five Rings, emerged from the cave's gloom not as polished tome, but as raw testament, its pages a forensic map of the mind's battlefield. Dictated in his final years to Terao Magonoho and other faithful pupils, the text circulated first in handwritten copies among Kumamoto's inner circle, guarded like a sacred relic amid the shogunate's watchful edicts. By the 18th century, as the Genroku era's cultural renaissance bloomed in Edo's tea-houses and kabuki stages, printers in Kyoto and Osaka seized upon it, disseminating editions that blended Musashi's stark prose with woodblock illustrations of dueling forms, katanas arcing through mist-shrouded forms, evoking the sensory chill of dawn encounters. The book's structure, elemental and unyielding, earth for foundations, water for fluidity, fire for assault, wind for rivals' follies, void for the formless essence, resonated beyond the dojo, infiltrating the merchant class's strategy manuals and even the shogun's advisors, who pored over its deceptions in council chambers scented with cedar and intrigue. Irony coiled through its legacy. The Ronin who scorned ritual birthed a canon that rigidified into schools, the Niten Ichi-ryu proliferating across domains, its dual-wield stances taught in hidden groves where young samurai grappled with the weight of Mushin, that no-mind clarity Musashi had forged in blood-soaked isolation. Art, too, bore his indelible mark, a quieter vein of influence laced with melancholy grandeur. In his twilight, Musashi's brush turned from sword to scroll, producing ink paintings that captured the ephemerality he had long pondered. The fierce shrike perched on a barren branch, its gaze unyielding yet fragile against the wind. Two wild geese in flight, wings slicing the void like twin blades in harmony. These works, gifted to patrons like Hosokawa Tadatoshi, survived in clan treasuries, their subtle strokes influencing the sumi-e tradition of the Edo period, where artists like Aikno Taiga drew upon Musashi's economy of line to evoke nature's inexorable flux. No florid ukiyo-e excess marred them. Instead, a stark minimalism that mirrored his philosophy, each void space on the paper a deliberate emptiness, inviting the viewer to confront the unspoken brutality beneath beauty. Disciples preserved these alongside the Gorin no Sho, compiling the Hyoho Shiji in the 1750s, a biography weaving fact from oral shadows, ensuring that Musashi's inner evolution, from reaper to sage, endured not as myth, but as psychological blueprint for those wrestling with violence's aftermath. Centuries unfurled, and Musashi's spectre infiltrated the West, his legacy a bridge across oceans, scarred by their own wars. In the 19th century, as Japan's Sakoku isolation cracked under Perry's black ships in 1853, Dutch traders smuggled fragments of the Gorin no Sho to Europe, where Prussian officers during the Franco-Prussian fray of 1870 adapted its stratagems to rifle lines and trench deceptions. By the 20th, as global conflicts echoed the Sengoku's chaos, trenches of the Great War, mirroring Sekigahara's mud, atomic shadows over Hiroshima evoking Honoji's blaze, Musashi's text resurfaced in English translations, Victor Harris's 1974 edition framing it as timeless psychology, influencing business titans like Bill Gates, who cited its adapt or perish ethos in boardrooms far from Kyoto's dojos. Films etched him deeper into collective psyche. Hiroshi Inagaki's 1954 samurai trilogy, with Toshiro Mifune's brooding portrayal, romanticized the Ronin's wanderings, yet captured the underlying fragility, the unkempt hair, the haunted eyes, humanizing the butcher without sanitizing the gore. Akira Kurosawa's shadow loomed in Vagabond, the 1998 manga by Takehiko Inoue, a visceral graphic novel that dissected Musashi's duels with forensic intimacy, blood sprays and fractured bones rendered in stark black and white, challenging readers to peer into the void of his kills. Pop culture, that modern coliseum of fleeting icons, amplified the paradox further. Video games like Way of the Samurai series cast players as his echo, navigating moral ambushes in pixelated Japans, while anime series like Samurai Champloo wove his Nighten flow into hip-hop-infused Ronin tales, blending brutality with ironic levity Musashi himself would have scorned. Yet academic reinterpretations ground these flights in rigor, debates raging in journals, from the Journal of Japanese Studies to Western symposiums. Was he truly undefeated, with 13 duels pristine in the annals, or did lost records hide defeats, the Nitenki's hagiography inflating kills to mythic proportions? Scholars like William Scott Wilson, in his 2002 biography, parse the Hyoho Shiji's oral biases, arguing Musashi's lethality as adaptive genius amid Sengoku flux, not superhuman prowess, his Ourbokken at Ganryu a pragmatic feint, not divine intervention. Misconceptions abound. The West paints him as Bushido's pinnacle, ignoring his rejection of ritual, his feral disdain for the code's pomp. Japanese romantics elevate him to bodhisattva, glossing the Yoshioka massacre's cold calculus, the human cost of his invincibility. Irony persists. The man who shunned fame fuels tourist shrines at Kokura, where replicas of his carved ore draw crowds seeking the warrior's spirit, blind to the melancholy solitude that defined him. These threads, books that outlive blades, films that resurrect shadows, debates that probe the bones, interweave a legacy of profound duality, grandeur in the strategies that shaped minds from daimyo to CEOs, melancholy in the fragility they expose, the inevitable fade of even the unbreakable. Musashi's echo lingers not as conqueror, but as provocateur, forcing confrontation with history's brutality, the rivers of blood that birthed wisdom, the personal voids that genius cannot fill. In an age of sanitized heroes, he remains the unvarnished truth, a Ronin whose path illuminates our own, where survival's edge cuts deepest inward. And in that reflection, the warrior's shadow endures, eternal, unbroken. And so, as the echoes of Musashi's name fade into the hush of centuries, we stand at the precipice of his enigma, gazing back across the blood-streaked roads that forged him, not as a monument to glory, but as a fractured mirror held to the human soul. The Ronin who wandered Japan's fractured heart. His twin blades, whispering through the fog of duels long silenced, leaves us not with answers, but with the weight of questions that linger like mist in the mountain passes. What does it mean to be invincible in a world that devours the invincible? To carve a path through rivers of blood, only to retreat to a cave's dim embrace, inscribing wisdom on scrolls that outlast the empires he spurned. Musashi's life was no linear ascent to apotheosis, but a spiral descent into the void, where each victory peeled away the illusions of permanence, revealing the fragility beneath the armor of steel and will. Consider the paradox that defined him. A man born to the Sengoku's thunder, where the clash of armies blotted the sun, and betrayal was the air one breathed. Who emerged not as tyrant or savior, but as the ultimate observer, detached, unrelenting, his eyes fixed on the horizon where blade met eternity. He slew at 13, a boy's hand stained with the warmth of first blood, and in that act the world tilted, innocence dissolving like dew under dawn's blade. From Sekigahara's mud-churned charnel to the Yoshioka's moonlit slaughter, from Kojiro's island brevity to Osaka's final futile stand, his path was a litany of calculated ends, each foe felled not in rage, but in the cold precision of adaptation, the Niton flow a dance with death's inexorable rhythm. Yet for all the lethality that history etched in his name, what endures is the melancholy turn inward, the unkempt wanderer who scorned the pomp of Bushido, bathing in rivers and sleeping beneath stars, seeking not dominion over others, but mastery over the chaos within. The Go-Rin no Sho, born in Reigando's chill, was no warrior's boast, but a sage's confession, the elements unfolding like the petals of a storm-torn flower, urging fluidity in a rigid world, emptiness as the truest strength. In the void, he wrote, all things are possible, a whisper from the cave's depths that echoes the fragility he never voiced, the neuralgia twisting his limbs, the isolation carving deeper than any scar, the realization that even the unbreakable yields to time's quiet erosion. History's brutality framed this introspection, a canvas vast and unforgiving. The Sengoku Jidai, that century of splintered states and devoured loyalties, was no backdrop to Musashi's tale, but its very forge, daimyo rising on piles of the fallen, gunpowder shattering the samurai's charge, Zen koans offering stoic refuge amid the screams. He was its dark distillation, the Ronin who rejected the era's hierarchies, wandering masterless while lords built castles of stone to mock the wooden past. And in the Edo's fragile peace, as Tokugawa's edicts chained the blade to bureaucracy, Musashi's evolution deepened the irony, a predator turned philosopher, his paintings of shrikes and geese capturing the grandeur of survival's edge, the melancholy of wings clipped by unseen winds. Human fragility pulsed through it all, the mother lost in childbirth's shadow, the family fractured by ambition's pull, the friends who faded into the road's endless curve. He fathered no bloodline to carry his name, only disciples who glimpsed the Mushin state, that no-mind clarity where fear evaporates like mist at sunrise. Yet even they could not fill the void. His death in 1645, unmarked and solitary, was the ultimate paradox, the most lethal samurai slipping into oblivion. His body returned to the mountain, as if the kami themselves reclaimed what war had borrowed. What lesson, then, does this shadow impart to us, adrift in our own age of veiled conflicts and inner wars? Musashi confronts us with the inevitability of the blade's double edge, violence as both creator and destroyer, genius blooming in blood's fertile soil, yet wilting under introspection's gaze. He was no romantic ideal, no cherry-blossom warrior fading in poetic grace. He was the raw pulse of survival, the predator who learned that true mastery lies not in the kill, but in transcending it, the turn from outward storm to the stillness within. In an era where we wield not katanas, but subtler weapons, algorithms of division, ambitions cloaked in progress, his path warns of the cost. Isolation's deepening chill, the soul's quiet fractures amid apparent triumph. Grandeur clings to his memory, yes, the undefeated duelist whose strategies whisper in boardrooms and battlefields alike. But it is laced with profound melancholy, the recognition that all paths, no matter how unyielding, lead to the cave's final hush. And in that reflection, we find not closure, but the open wound of truth. Musashi endures because he mirrors our own unspoken voids, the capacity for brutality masked as destiny, the yearning for harmony amid chaos. Forget the myths that polish him to heroic sheen, embrace the Ronin as he was, feral, introspective, unbreakable yet profoundly breakable. For in understanding his paradox, we glimpse our own, the warrior in every heart, dancing on the edge between destruction and enlightenment, forever pulled toward the infinite quiet beyond the blade. The roads he walked are gone, overgrown with time's indifferent green, but their echo lingers, a call to confront the self, to wield not just force, but wisdom forged in the fire of what we endure. And that, in the end, changes everything.